All right, Mr. G here. We're going to add our second voice to our second melody that we wrote in our minor mode. A couple things ahead of time. When we're done with this exercise, we're going to end up with a piece of music that'll sound classical in nature. It's going to be simplistic, but it will sound pretty, and it'll be. And honestly, when we're done with this, it's really just the beginning, because this is how I compose a lot of my original classical music. I do what we're doing here. I write a cantus firma, which is what we did with our first melody. Then I write all the other parts in whole notes, just like we're doing this. Now, in college, they call this first species counterpoint. We don't need to get into all that. Just know that I'm starting off with all whole notes, and I'm going to get it so that it sounds pretty to me when I'm done, and then we proceed from there to connecting the dots, where we move into other note values. And I'll show you all that. That'll come later. So just know that it's going to be a classical sounding piece of music when we're done. What you do with it after that is totally on you and your imagination and where your heart leads you. So let's get started. You remember with our first melody here that we approached the last note from a full step above down to the D. Well, whatever you do on the first part, you do the opposite in the second part. So if I went from a full step above, that means I'm going to approach the bottom D, the second voice, from a C sharp below. Now, you remember when I told you approach the next to the last note, that E, from anywhere from a third below to a third above. It would be like a C sharp to a G. Well, I pretty much can do the same thing here. I've decided I'm going to go from E to a C sharp. So we have and this is what it's going to sound like. Sounds pretty cool. All right, so now what I do is I'm going to go back to the beginning. And then I'm going to work my way from left to right this time. My notes, well, my note choices are going to be pretty much restricted to the intervals that I'm allowed. I'm allowed unisons and octaves. I'm allowed third, fifths, and sixths. A fourth as a final last resort, but absolutely avoid seconds and sevenths. If you're unsure what those intervals are, then go back to that lesson we had on intervals, or you can just Google intervals on the internet. By the time you get to this point, you should understand how to figure out intervals. But anyway, go back to those lessons and work that out. But anyway, thirds, fifths, and sixths are good. Fourths, seconds and sevenths, verboten. Unisons and octaves, only for the beginning and the end of a phrase or a song. So we've used octaves at the beginning and end here. We're not going to use unisons. We're not going to use seconds and sevenths. So those are my choices. So I went from a D down to a C there. I can't go from a D to a C because that's parallel motion into an octave, and we don't want to use octaves in the middle of the song. So I'm going to go, contrary motion's always the best. You never have a bad note choice if you use contrary motion. So I want D up to an E. That's E to C. There's my sixth. We're good. Now you notice how my C jumped down to an F. Well, I can't take my E and move it up to an F. Well, I could do whatever I want. But again, that's a unison. And even though it's contrary motion into a unison, and it would be okay. For me, my personal likes and dislikes, I'm going to avoid unisons in the middle. So I'm just going to go back to the D here. Because D to F, that's a third. It's always good. Now, I could keep a D here for this next note. Oblique motion while the F moves up to the G. But again, I want to avoid fourths if I don't need to, and I don't need to. I'm going to do parallel thirds here. Now, the next note, G goes up to an A. I could keep the E. I could do that. But that's a fourth again, E, F, G, A. So no, I could go back down to the D, but gosh, that D is showing up an awful lot. No, I don't want to do that. I'm going to do thirds again. Now, the A went up to the D. Cool. Where am I going to go for my F? Well, I could move my F up to the B underneath it, but then that B, see right here, is higher than the A. I kind of don't want this voice going over to that voice's territory. I'm going to keep it underneath that. So my F, I don't want it crossing higher than that A up to the B. Could I go to an A? Yeah, but then again, I'm kind of playing in that other voice's territory. Could I go to a G to a D? Yes, I could. Well, no, I can't. Because G to D is a fifth, right? And that would be similar motion. F up to G, A up to D. So my possibly best solution would be an F. Keep an F here. Oblique motion. F, F, A up to D. And then look what we did here. F to D is a sixth. Then I went parallel motion 6, E to C sharp. That's good. Then I skipped down to the C sharp while the other guy skipped up to the E, contrary motion. And then I stepped up to the D, stepped down to the D. Oh, contrary motion there. So now let's hear what this thing sounds like from the very beginning. Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right, this is a good place for me to start. Now, the next thing I will do is I will transfer this second bottom voice down to the viola part. And when we come back to visit this melody again, we're going to fill in the other two voices. And we're going to end up with 4 parts that are going to sound wonderful and pretty. I'm pretty pleased. Now, next lesson coming up is going to be, we're going to do the same thing, but now I'm going to take 2 melodies in our major scale or a major mode. And we're going to discuss that in a little bit more detail. So anyway, Mr. G out. Have a great, grand, and glorious day. Bye-bye.